I was looking at whether or not there's a difference in the amount of swamp rabbits that inhabit the upper cache or the lower cache. I didn't see any real ones out there. No, they're hard to find. But just a little bit about swamp rabbits. They live in the southeastern United States, actually, but they are able to come up this far north because of the Cache wetland. They like to live near water. They like to live in the wetlands. So we can actually find them at their northernmost reach here in southern Illinois. And since we were looking at their habitat, we had to start thinking about what kinds of things might affect swamp rabbit occupancy. So first we looked at human alteration of ecosystems like logging or planting crops or urbanization. And that led us into, when we do those things, when we alter the land, we end up chopping those habitats up into pieces or fragments. And then you go on down here to sources or sinks, that goes right along with it, where you have these fragments of habitat now, and either they are still a pretty good area for a rabbit or any other living thing to live, and they're called sources, they have high productivity, or they get chopped up so small that nothing can really survive there anymore, and they're sinks. And another thing was altering that natural flow regime, which I think Ian mentioned a little bit earlier. The upper cache and lower cache being split into basically two separate rivers by the Post Creek Cutoff and some other levees. And when you start messing with the natural flow, you kind of mess up what lives there. So there have been other studies that have been done on swamp rabbit occupancy in southern Illinois, but I didn't find anywhere where anybody just compared what's going on in the upper cache to the lower cache area. So our objective was to determine if there is any difference in their occupancy in the upper and lower cache. And the hypothesis was that we would probably find more swamp rabbits in that upper cache area. Perhaps it's less fragmented or has more higher quality habitat there. The upper cache does have a better flow of water, which usually brings more diverse organisms to that area. So what we did, and we have a picture over here of we actually, when we were planning this, we said, okay, we're going to have 10 random sites in the upper cache and 10 random sites in the lower cache, but of course we didn't have enough time to look at all that. So this is what we actually did. We surveyed 2 sites in the upper Cache River and 3 sites at the lower Cache River that are already considered to be areas that are supposed to be suitable for swamp rabbits. And we used a computer program that had a habitat model in it for that, to find that information. And then when we got to the sites, we recorded the number of latrines we found, which is 1 log is a latrine. You find poop on a log, that's a latrine log for a swamp rabbit. So we counted how many latrines we saw, and we also measured the canopy cover, but this is the densiometer that we use. Connie was talking about the spherical densiometer. That, to me, is like the poor folks. It's made out of pipes. But you look through, there's like a mirror in there and some levels, and you look through this part and it shoots up to the sky. We make sure everything's level, and then you can see how much canopy cover there is. So we estimated the percentage of canopy cover in each area. Yeah, I'll show you the map. Here's what we started with. And the upper cache starts way up there and comes down to about here. The Post Creek Cutoff is right in here. So all the stars up here are the 10 sites that we had randomly chosen to survey. And then we have 10 stars going all the way down this direction in the lower cache. But the ones that are labeled and circled are the ones that we actually were able to get to in the 3 days that we had. And that told us this. So just one way to look at the data that we found, first of all, the latrine logs. This totally supports what I said, and I'm like, yay! So we found latrine logs at both of our upper cache sites, and then we found nothing as far as latrine logs go at the lower cache sites. So that does actually support my hypothesis. Then if you look at canopy cover, though, the canopy cover really looks about the same. Upper cache, lower cache, except for this oddball in the middle here. And I think the reason that that one is so much different, and I made the little note up at the top here, is because this site was highway on one side, we walked down the road and went into this area here, and then we had open water. So there weren't as many trees growing. There was nowhere for them to grow to have that canopy cover. So I'm not too concerned about this one being so different, because if you look at mostly comparing upper cache and lower cache, it's about the same as far as canopy cover goes. But at the same time, we still found the logs in the upper cache and not at all in the lower cache. So I have a bar graph here, just another maybe easier way to look at the data. And again, you can see this is upper cache, the blue is lower cache, this is just percentage of canopy cover. We took 9 readings at each site of canopy cover, and then we averaged them together. So canopy cover doesn't seem to make a big difference for where the swamp rabbits live. And since that didn't matter too much, we then looked at maybe it's because there are different sizes of habitats at the different places. Maybe there's more habitat area in the upper cache and less in the lower cache. But as you can see here, and these are just averages, we took all of the plots, I guess you could call them, that the program said this is a suitable area for these rabbits to live. This is how big it is. We took those, averaged them together, and really the lower cache did end up being a little bit higher, but still they're pretty comparable. So maybe it's not that it's fragmented differently. Maybe they're all okay with the size. So in summary, we did find evidence of the swamp rabbits at the upper cache, but not lower. The canopy cover, like I said, pretty similar when you compare the two areas. The size of the habitat patches, pretty similar. We did go ahead and run some t-tests comparing canopy cover in upper and lower, and then also comparing habitat size in upper and lower, and no significant difference there, which does kind of back me up on saying it doesn't seem to matter too much. So what's the deal? Why do the swamp rabbits like to live in the upper than the lower? Obviously a lot more data is needed. You can't just look at 2 sites and 3 sites and say you've solved everybody's problems and figured it all out. But preliminary data does suggest habitat area, canopy cover, not major influences. They are more likely, and I couldn't just say, well, they just live in the upper cache and they don't live in the lower cache. Even though that's what I saw, I can't say that. So more likely to live up there. Maybe it's this, maybe it's hydrology, which I did mention before, but we didn't really look at or have any way to measure hydrology compared to habitat. But I'm thinking that if somebody can figure out a way in the future to test somehow if hydrology has an effect on where those swamp rabbits live, because the upper cache does, like I said, have that better flow. It's more of a natural kind of flow. The lower cache is more of a stagnant area, lots of sediment buildup. Research shows that better flow, more of a natural flow regime does lead to a higher diversity of organisms. So that's what I'm thinking. Those are my thoughts. And